Good morning. Thank you for the invitation to speak with you at the 10th Annual Benchmarking Conference in Nanjing. My name is Bob Camp, and I'm a founding member and President Emeritus of the Global Benchmarking Network, which is bringing you this conference. I'm sad I can't be with you, but I am pleased to come to you via the distance learning video conferencing capability of the Graduate School of Management at Cornell University. My objective today is to share with you some of our experience with benchmarking, some of the imperatives for it and for its use, some of the benchmarking basics, the effectiveness of pursuit, and lessons learned throughout the presentation. And I will cover three mini case studies to show you how significant results have been achieved. So here are the key messages. There is a critical need for benchmarking. In today's world, we have just come out of 20 years of major change, and I see almost a continuous change for the next 20 years. And the imperative then is that we have the capability to understand change and to make change effective and innovative. We also are pursuing a global initiative for excellence through the business excellence model. That is a worldwide search for best practice, but not just best practices for themselves, but best practice to master them, to know how to effectively implement them and use them. And then there are the proven steps of the process, because given your careful pursuit of these three steps and completion of these three steps will guarantee what your success and outcome. So the first step is to improve a critical process. That's what to benchmark. Second is source best practice partners. There's whom to benchmark. And documenting superior practices. That means getting your arms around all of the resources available to you to understand the best practices. Those are the three proven steps that you need to be conscious of, complete with diligence, and probably go through some training. And with that, it's quite possible that we might end up with some breakthrough results. Those people who study successful change say there are three things you need to do to accomplish that. First, you need to believe there is a need for change. Secondly, you need to know what you want to change. And thirdly, you need to paint a picture of what you will look like after the change is finished. We believe that benchmarking is crucial in accomplishing each of those three steps. First of all, it's the gap between the internal and external practices. That's the gap between you and your external benchmarking partners that creates the need for change. And as a case in point, we'll talk about the benchmarking that we did at Xerox in my 20 plus years there with LL Bean, a online ordering and catalog company of outdoor apparel. And we went there and focused on their warehouse operations, and we found that they were processing their orders 3 times faster than we were. That created an absolute crucial need for change. Then we need to understand the best practices. Well, the best practices in this case were that Bean was arranging their materials in the warehouse so that the fast movers were closest to the picking line. And then secondly, they then by computer directed the picker to minimize the travel distance to fulfill those orders. And if I took the complete process of a warehouse, namely receive material, put it away, inventory control, pick, pack, and ship, if I then went and expanded my search for practices across all of those different facets of the warehouse operation, I could put together a composite picture of what we need to look like at the end of that change. Those things will almost ensure that you make change successful. Now I'm going to pause here just slightly. I want you to look at this picture. It is a picture of one of the largest dump trucks that is available. It's used primarily in mines to haul mine material, whether it be gravel, precious metals, coal, or whatever. And perhaps you've seen some of these vehicles or pictures of them. Notice the individual down at the bottom left-hand corner. It shows the size of the truck in relation to the height of a person. This is one massive truck. And for this truck, the operators wanted to benchmark a few of its critical components, and so they went and benchmarked against Disney World. Now, you may think that was a tourist trip, but in fact it was a legitimate benchmarking visit. And what I want you to concentrate on is what, in fact, were they benchmarking? And at the end of the session, we'll come back and discuss what the results were. So a little challenge there to think about during the course of the presentation. The presentation is based on at least these 3 books, plus a lot of client engagements, as well as conferences like these and training sessions. You'll notice the 3 books are all titled Benchmarking, and the subtitles say Best Practices, focus on best practices. And the global cases, I will show you some examples from that book to show you how, in fact, significant results can be achieved. So is benchmarking a tool for performance improvement that is used today? Well, the answer is yes. This is information cataloged by a consultancy, Bain & Company. You'll notice that 70 to 73% of the companies pursue benchmarking, and from time to time, benchmarking is either ranked number 1 or number 2 or number 3. But in addition to that, the high interest in it, it also has a very high level of satisfaction, almost a 4 out of a rank of 5. So it is a significant approach to performance improvement. And will we get results? Well, here are some of those case studies in the case study book. You'll notice that it spreads across the United States, Europe, America, so all over the world, and across different industries, manufacturing and service, private enterprise, and then the public-private entities, nonprofits, government, and education. And you'll see some common names that you will recognize, Chevron and IBM as a case in point, and below the name is the process they were focusing on. And so it's significant that this really is across all sectors of the globe and all different economic endeavors. I'm sorry. And will we get results? Well, similarly, in the case of Chevron, in the upper left-hand corner, 50% less cycle time, 20% less cost. And the next one, which was the Statoil, the state oil company of Norway, you have a 25% return for every dollar invested in benchmarking, and that is fairly significant. So I think these stand as proof statements of the interest in benchmarking and the results that can be attained through benchmarking. And now we need to turn our attention to understanding some of the key types of benchmarking that you can pursue. I like to do this by using a sports analogy. You remember that we just recently finished the Summer Olympics in Brazil. And here is one of the track and field events, the pole vault. And you can see the image of the pole vaulter on the left. He's looking at the height that he has to jump, and he's wondering, how am I going to accomplish that? What process can I take, and what best practices will be in that process? Well, the first thing he can do is to study himself. He can do that by having a coach watch him, observe him, and then give him feedback. He can also then take a videotape of himself and watch the tape and see that he's getting into the right crouch in order to get over the bar. The second thing he can do is he can look and study the Olympic gold medal winner, essentially the competition, and study from him to see how, in fact, he is able to attain the Olympic record. And then thirdly, that is called competitive benchmarking. And thirdly, then, there is the option of breaking the process down into its various functions. And in this case, the pole vault is boiled down to two major functions, one running and the other jumping. And in the running category, are there any other track and field events that he could study? And the answer is yes, certainly. There's the 100-yard dash, fast acceleration, short distance, and perhaps also the long jump. So he has a chance of looking for running best practices there. And obviously in the jumping side, there is the high jump. The high jump, which way to take off to get the best elevation to go over the bar. And I guess you could ask yourself, have there been any breakthroughs in any of these events? And if you recall, at one point in time, the pole vault was jumped face first over the bar. And along came an individual by the name of Fosbury, and he said, why do I have to do that? I'm going to jump backwards over the bar. And so the Fosbury flop was invented, and that broke all kinds of rules and all kinds of records in the high jump. So there's potentially an opportunity for some real breakthrough results, even in sporting events. But in this case, the pole vaulter says, look, I want to do something about my pole. And he talks about possibly installing a spring and using that, again, as a basis for gaining the height that he needs. You may be sitting there saying, well, wait a minute, you can't do that. That's not legal. But I would say the following. It's true that you can't put a spring in the equipment. But however, the poles today are made of composite materials, and you recall they bend, and there is some springiness in the pole that helps him achieve his ultimate goal. So that is the quick explanation through an example of what the different kinds of benchmarking are. And here they are in tabular form. First of all, internal benchmarking, that's similar operations within an organization. And I turn back my recall to Texas Instruments, who at one point in time said we need to build a 13th fabricating plant for silicon chips. And one insightful executive said, well, wait a minute. We have 12 other plants existing that are filling the demand now. Why do we have to build a 13th plant? Why can't we go to each of the 12 existing plants, challenge them to showcase what their best practices might be, share those best practices among the plants, and see how, in fact, we can increase productivity and potentially avoid building that 13th plant at a fairly significant expense of close to $1 billion. Competitive benchmarking, you need to compare against the competition, but it's not just any of the competitors. You want to be focusing on the best competitors. So somewhere around the top three best competitors are what you want to focus on. You know what functional benchmarking is, and then there's generic process, simply exemplary work processes, which you can find almost anywhere. Now, the second one is called competitive benchmarking. The combination of the other three are sometimes called non-competitive benchmarking. And there are three reasons why you want to pursue non-competitive benchmarking. The first is that there are many, many more non-competitors whom you can research and potentially find best practice partners. Secondly, they typically would be more willing to share. You do not compete with them directly, but in addition, they may also want to learn. And then thirdly is a good understanding that the competitors oftentimes may not have best practices, and you need to go elsewhere to find them. So here's our the copier company comparing itself to the camping goods company, LL Bean and Xerox. And we did go to them, we visited them, we understood what their best practices were. And then one of the lessons learned in pursuing benchmarking is, even though we were a copier company, when we understood what the best practices were, we came back, we did not try to copy the best practices of this leading camping goods company. What we did was we took an understanding of closeness of the materials to the picking line and minimizing the travel distance. We took those best practices back to the operational people and said, look, we want you to see how, in fact, you can innovatively and creatively implement those best practices in our operations. And we did that. The two don't look the same, but they're based on the same fundamental best practices. So a key understanding of benchmarking: you don't copy, you challenge the organization to do better. So here's the final understanding then of benchmarking, the formal understanding of benchmarking. It's the process of identifying, understanding, and adapting superior practices in organizations locally. Understand, perhaps you may be looking for best practice partners in Nanjing and eventually throughout China, but to make sure that in fact you're not overlooking something that may appear somewhere else, you eventually will have to do a worldwide search to make sure there isn't somebody out there that are doing things better than you are. To help your organization improve its performance and achieve business priority results. So I think at this stage you have an understanding of not only the interest in benchmarking, the results that can be obtained, and the 4 different types of benchmarking and the rationale for their use, as well as the capstone understanding of do not copy, but get the organization to improve on the implementation of the best practices by innovatively implementing them. So at this stage of the game, we need to turn then to the process itself. And I mentioned there were 3 of them. And the first step is improve a critical process. That is, what to benchmark. Improve a mission critical process, not just any process, but one which is going to give you significant results. And how do you go about doing that? Well, the steps are identify, list the processes, and then go in and prioritize them, because you can't solve them all at once. You want to solve the critical ones and gain results from that, and then possibly go to the others. Document, analyze, and develop a few key measures then are the other steps, and those are essential to gain acceptance by anyone you approach to become a benchmarking partner. Because you can lay down the documentation we have, you can show them your performance measures, and they will be interested because you have done the homework, and they in turn can understand that they potentially will learn also. So define the process is critically important to gaining understanding and acceptance of an information exchange with benchmarking partners. Here's a typical diagram of a supply chain process. It's a cyclical process, and the distribute in the upper right-hand corner is where, in fact, we would find the warehousing. And that's what we focused on. But we did document the whole process, and over a number of years, all of these aspects were benchmarked. We also documented the performance measures to see what kind of performance improvement we could expect. And we're comparing the data in this tabulation to a cross-section of about 11 or 12 different companies. You see the best-in-class performance on the right at the 80th percentile, and the average in the middle. And so you, compared to that data, are the red triangles, and you can say, okay, we're fairly close in the comparison to 6 days of upside production flexibility. but the others show where, in fact, we need to improve, and that's where we need to concentrate our best practice search. And here's our first little mini case study. I have been impressed with some of the benchmarking that's been done by the government, both at the federal, the state, and the local levels. But this one was focusing on complaint handling. Complaint handling by citizens is one of the ways they approach the government, either electronically or over the telephone. The executive order said, look, measure satisfaction and address complaints. The learnings came from 12 different best practices, not only of the comparison of the different agencies that participated in the study, but also 11 external industrial companies. The three things that they learned at the highest level were make it easy for the citizen to complain. You'll have fewer dissatisfied customers. Speedy response also adds to customer satisfaction and loyalty. And finally, if you can have the problem resolved on the first contact, the first telephone call, that will add immeasurably. So here's the step number 2, source best practice partners. That is, whom to benchmark. The objective is to source best practice partners for exchange, information exchange. The best competitors and functional industry leaders are ones you're going to want to focus on. You're going to want to think laterally, by analogy, generalize the concept. Remember the pole vaulter. It wasn't a spring, but it was springiness. And who might have best practices out there that would show how that could be accomplished. And ultimately, you'll come down with a list of perhaps maybe 20 or 25 companies. You further research those and boil it down to perhaps somewhere between 6 and 7 whom you would want to contact and say, look, would you be interested in an information exchange? And oh, by the way, we can supply you all of our documentation so you can see exactly what we're talking about, and you can also learn from us. So what are the sources that you can look for best practice partners? Well, certainly talking to customers, perhaps suppliers, research, in particular through professional associations. We use the Logistics Professional Association extensively for the warehouse operations. Publications, and what is an annual report for? An annual report is simply a document which says, we are best at these things. They talk about best practices, referrals, and a conference. Now think about it. You're here at this conference because you have some interest in best practices and benchmarking. It's a golden opportunity to acquaint yourself with other colleagues that are here and start a conversation around whether they would also be interested in an information exchange. Obviously, award winners and down through consultants who can say, you absolutely should go visit LL Bean. And the second mini case study is the Statoil oil well casing delivery out to the offshore drilling rigs. They mapped the process. They found 3 different models of best practice. You can see them down below: in-house, consignment, outsourcing. They achieved a 25-to-1 benefit ratio. That is, for every dollar invested in benchmarking, they received $25 in return. That's a pretty hefty return for a study like this. And a key learning on their part was do not become obsessed with data. Find the key top-level measures that will show you there is a gap, and then focus on the best practices. In fact, in my opinion, data is probably worth 10 to 15% of your grade. The other 80 to 85% of your time has to be spent focusing on the best practices, because they tell you then how you're going to achieve those numbers. And finally, document superior practices. Exercise all the information sources that there are. This is a matter of doing searches of information sources and ultimately leading up to potentially a site visit. And here are some of the ways that you can conduct some of these searches. And I'm not going to go through all this data. It's a very busy chart. But I would simply show you, point out to you that on the left are the full formal benchmarking projects, some that take anywhere from 3 to 6 months with a team of anywhere from 4 to 5 people, possibly working part-time. And all the way to the right are informal contacts where you simply want to get an indication of whether you're on the right track. But what I really want to have you focus on is the middle column, which says best practice reports. We have done a great deal of benchmarking. Over the years, there must be hundreds, if not thousands, of reports filed electronically somewhere that you can access, either through professional associations or literature searches that would be cited in an article or the like. I urge you to go and find those best practices as a starting point to at least marshal all of the evidence of best practices that you can pursue in your benchmarking project. And here's finally the last case study. It involves Xerox. We focused on the supply chain, which is the movement of supplies out to the manufacturer through marketing, and in the case of the high-tech industry, handling returns. Our approach was to look worldwide and redesign the process. We did internal benchmarking with our colleagues in Rank Xerox in the UK and also in Fuji Xerox in Southeast Asia. We also visited a cross-section of exemplary companies that we had very carefully researched and approached with all of our data and information to incent them to want to participate. And the results? Well, we had significant increased asset turns of our inventories by about 1/3. That in turn, along with the other assets the company had, reduced the overall return on investment by somewhere around a percentage point, plus or minus. And that was significant because the employee retirement program was funded by the improvement in the return on assets, so everybody in the company benefited by this benchmarking study. Okay, we've now covered the 3 steps of the process, and I think you understand them, and the summary is do those with diligence, because oftentimes I have people coming to me and saying, we've done some benchmarking and we are dissatisfied with the results. And I say, show me your documentation. Show me how you did step 1, step 2, and step 3. And invariably I find that that had been done with not the amount of detail that was important, and that's where the problem lay. So, as a wrap-up, what can we say about the future? Well, the process will remain the same. I don't see a way that we can change going through especially the first 3 key steps. However, we can do it with electronic documentation and sharing and do that more quickly, perhaps more accurately, and have that easily transmissible out to our benchmarking partners. It'll probably be less costly. It'll be done faster, perhaps a little less formally, but that depends on your level of interest. We'll use real-time interactive meeting technology like we're using right today with this presentation. Fewer efficient site visits via video conferencing. However, I believe that an on-site visit to a company is very, very essential selectively in confirming the data and what you see, as well as perhaps giving you some peripheral view of things that you would not otherwise have seen. So, prepackaged best practice learning case studies we already covered, and that would be essential also. So this is a strategic strength when practiced and a fatal weakness if not pursued. It's a critical tool for how you run your business. And here's the view of a CEO. The prime objective of benchmarking is to understand those practices that will provide a competitive advantage in the marketplace. Target setting is secondary. Notice the emphasis on the practices. Target setting, namely data, is secondary. So, I need you to do some benchmarking. Thank you for your attention. And now we need to cover the results of the mine haul truck. Well, you may think about the operation of the mine haul truck. Perhaps it was the scheduling that was what they were after. It might have been something to deal with the queuing of the trucks, when they're getting ready to be filled and then dumping. But there was one critical component that they focused on, and that was the ability of the truck to dump the bin. And that, of course, depends on hydraulics. And all of the Disney characters are run with hydraulics. So the people at Disney were excellent at hydraulics. They mastered hydraulics. And there really was a legitimate reason to go and visit them. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the conference with my colleagues.